increased then suddenly, revealing the familiar glow of streetlights from Salem's main thoroughfare. With shaky hands, he wiped sweat from his forehead and forced himself to breathe deeply, safe now. But even as he realized how fortunate he'd been, a sudden chill snaked down his spine. He could not shake the feeling that his escape was nothing but an illusion, that the nightmare was only beginning. John hesitated. What should he do? Call the police? They would never believe him. Whispers of insanity, hallucinations, vivid dreams. And then he'd be locked up in a padded room somewhere, subjected to tests and treatments trying to scrub clean the things he couldn't explain. Let's get out of here, he muttered to himself, turning away from the road and heading back into the sheltering trees. Back towards the house. But it was gone. There had been a house, now there was only empty space between the trees and an overgrown garden path. He ran to the edge of the woods, to the point where he was sure the street had to emerge again. But all he found was a weathered stone wall disappearing into the shadows, unbroken and unyielding. Had he imagined it all? Was the cut on his arm nothing but a trick of the light? He reached up to trace the jagged line. It was real enough. In the middle of it, a single strand of hair unlike his own, fine and silvery. An irrational thought crossed his mind, sharp and unwelcome. What if he were being watched? His heart hammered in his chest as he glanced over his shoulder. Nothing. Only the distant sound of crickets and the rustling of leaves stirred by a hidden wind. Still, he could not help but press onward, pushing through the trees until he finally stumbled onto the familiar road. Relief flooded him as car lights and street lamps painted stripes of color across the pavement, promising the safety of the city of reality. Yet as he walked away from the incident, the feeling that he was not alone did not fade. In fact, it intensified, settling heavily upon his shoulders like a shroud. Suddenly, a shape detached itself from the darkness along the roadside. A tall, slender figure outlined against the faint lamplight, holding something in its hands. As it drew closer, John could make out the details. A woman, her hair wild, her clothes torn, and in her outstretched hands a bundle wrapped in cloth. Her eyes, hollow and intense, locked onto his, sending a jolt of terror through him. "Help me," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves scraping against bone. "Help me save my daughter." John recoiled instinctively, yet the woman persisted, stepping into the meager light. He saw then the pallor of her skin, the dark hollows beneath her eyes, and in her arms, swaddled tightly, a tiny form, pale and lifeless. Panic rose within him, choking his voice as he tried to scream, to run, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. The woman approached, oblivious to his terror. "Please," she whispered, pressing the bundle into his hands. "Take her, hide her, protect her." John stared at the cloth-wrapped form in his arms, unable to comprehend the scene unfolding before him. But as he did, the street, the lights, the very fabric of reality around them seemed to dissolve into shadows. The woman's face swam closer, her expression contorted with pain and urgency. "Save her," she begged. "Please save my Eliza." Her voice echoed in his mind as the world grew dark. The last thing he remembered was the touch of tiny fingers, cold and still, gripping his shirt. John awoke gasping, drenched in a cold sweat. Pre-dawn light filtered through his window, painting stripes of gray across his ceiling. His heart pounded against his ribs, each beat drumming the memory of his nightmare into his brain. Beside him, his sheets lay rumpled and empty-eyed Eliza. The name echoed in his mind, pulling him from sleep. He bolted upright, scrabbling for his phone on the bedside table, his mind racing. What had that dream meant? Was it just a figment of his imagination or a warning from his subconscious? He dialed 911, his hands shaking as he explained the dream in a rush of breathless words. The operator, calm and reassuring, promised that an officer would be dispatched to his location. But as the minutes passed without news, a growing dread coiled in his stomach. What if his call had been disconnected? What if the line had been cut during his panic babbling? Memories of the dream assaulted him. The grave, the chanting voices, the ethereal figures emerging from the mist. Could such a thing actually exist? If so, who was Eliza? And why did her fate seem intertwined with his? The insistent chime of his doorbell sliced through his thoughts. Startled, he scrambled to the window and peered out. Two officers stood on his doorstep, their presence a tangible relief. Relieved, he rushed to open the door, his voice shaking as he explained his dream. The officers, professional and courteous, assured him that they would investigate, but their politeness could not disguise the skepticism in their eyes. Yet even as he heard their polite reassurances, a seed of doubt took root in his mind. What if the police found nothing? Would he be labeled as as a dreamer lost in a world of fantasy. Was there something sinister lurking beneath the surface of his nightmare? Something that defied rational explanation? As the day wore on and the officers returned empty-handed, John found himself trapped in a labyrinth of uncertainty, each unanswered question deepening his descent into paranoia. Was he truly in danger, or was he merely a prisoner of his own fear-stricken imagination? The elusive nature of his nightmare left him suspended between two realities, neither fully convincing, both utterly terrifying. Suddenly, the tranquility of his home became a stifling prison. The walls seemed to close in, the windows to become barred gates. Sunlight filtering through the glass took on the ominous quality of a spotlight illuminating a stage set. Every creak of the floorboard, every sigh of wind against the window pane sent tremors of fear through him. Once comforting routines, showering, shaving, eating, now seemed alien and fraught with peril. The simple act of preparing a meal transformed into a battle against paralyzing fear. As he stood in his kitchen, knife in hand, the familiar surroundings twisted into a labyrinth of dread. The countertop morphed into a slab of stone, the utensils into instruments of sacrifice. Each slice he made, each chop he executed felt less like the preparation of food and more like a ritualistic offering. The bubbling stew in the pot took on a sinister hue, resembling a cauldron of some macabre concoction. Every gurgle, every hiss from the depths of the pot sounded like a whispered threat. As he sank into a chair at the table, the four walls of his dining room compressed, sealing him within their confines. The cutlery, once symbols of nourishment, transformed into instruments of torture. The tablecloth, a shroud draped over a tomb. Each bite he took, each swallow he managed, was a victory over the unseen forces attempting to choke him. The rest of the world receded into the background, becoming a muffled roar as it viewed through the thick glass of a mausoleum. Hours crawled by, each minute pregnant with anticipation. The silence was shattered by a knock at the door, sharp, insistent, demanding entrance. John froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. Was it them? Did they come for him in the end? His dream, his nightmare blurred, reality yielded, swallowed whole by the encroaching darkness. Just as his dream had begun, now his waking life threatened to collapse into the abyss of the unknown. He sat motionless, a prisoner in his own home, awaiting the inevitable. Then from inside the house, a sound so innocent, so mundane it should have brought comfort. A gentle knock at the front door, followed by the soft jingle of keys in a lock. Relief washed over him, so profound,